Retro Hangover is supported via Patreon by listeners like you. We would especially like to thank patrons Lyle McCarnes, Tony G, Tom the Superhero, Stud Still Smash the Milkman, Raging Demon, Mast Keaton, Lucas from Game Over Hell, Ozzy Garcia, JC, Megan Caruso, Rick Firestone, Dave Jackson, Jenny E, Retro Overdrive, Soha the Emperor, Storm Beagle, Matt aka Stormageddon, Pete Ross and Van Fernal from Super Garbage Day, Randall Quiggle, Keith Gasper, the Retro Vixen, Eric Guess, Nomad from the Retro Wildlands podcast, Ash Events, Alan Bingham, Mike the Rep from Backbreaker Gaming, Ryan Player One, Alt, Low5 Alex, Renner Dreaming, Omi, Makeshift Money, and Sega Boy 7. Your continued engagement and generous donations are deeply appreciated. Welcome to The Flight, a consumable curation of champions and catastrophes that is considerate of your chronometer. It's me, Chris, and you know what? After almost 10 years of doing this, it might be time for a reboot. Maybe not. Maybe we're just going to keep trucking along like we are. What do you say, Shane?
I don't know. We kind of had a reboot, at least one.
We did
early on, right? So I feel like we did what we needed to do. I don't know. We settled into a groove at this point, you know. I feel like we're in a good spot.
So maybe we should put the RHP on the best reboots.
I didn't even think about that. It'd be super meta.
Yeah. We've earned that right.
I think so.
I don't think we're going to put that on our list today's, but did you include
that? No, I did not. I did not think of that until you just mentioned it now. So would have been funny, but alas, no. But, I think that there were plenty of other good choices to select over the decades and decades of games. I mean, if there's nothing else that we can count on from our media overlords, it is going back to the well again and again and again. And I guess, fortunately enough for us, occasionally a series reboot turns out to be pretty good. So we got that going for us. That's nice. And on that note, Chris, how would you like to kick us off here with your number 5 reboot?
Number 5.
So I'm going to start this off by saying on my list, I have only played one game that has been on here. I am looking to games that had a major impact, I think, in gaming culture, that had a major impact in terms how games around it were being made. And I was very aware of them. These aren't niche games, but speaking of niche games, I do want to throw out an honorable mention to Ys 6, The Ark of Nipishtim. And once again, that's not a God bless you word. That is a game that in a series I love. Patrons will know this, and people who have been around the show for a long time will know that. But I don't want to talk about that one too much because I think these other games had much more of a lasting impact or an important impact. And that's going to have me start off with Tomb Raider. The first one that came out on the Xbox 360 and PS3. So many people know that Tomb Raider was a big, just gigantic game in the mid-90s. We reviewed it. We had thoughts on it. A lot of people say that it's still good. They are entitled to their opinion. But a lot of people liked that game, and some people still like the game. They've had those remasters come out recently. But there's no denying that by the mid to late PlayStation 2 era, that Lara had run her course. She was getting tired of the annualized releases. The quality of the Tomb Raider games had dipped even, well, I mean, not for me because I never liked them, but for fans of the genre, and no one could really get behind them anymore. And no, that's not a sex joke. This is, well, only because it's Tomb Raider. I know I'm off to a terrible run here, but what they did is that IDOS completely reinvented Tomb Raider from the ground up. They made it grittier. They made it more realistic. And these are things nowadays, and when we're recording this in 2025, that have been a little bit overplayed. But at this time, this was something that was a little bit more fresh. This was what people were expecting. And it gave the series a lot of life. It gave the franchise a lot of life. And from what I understand, it was a solid game that a lot of people appreciated and loved. Old fans of the series made new fans of the series, and was different enough from the Uncharted series to kind of chart its own course. Of course, Uncharted being very heavily inspired by the Raider series as well. So it was kind of the right release at the right time for the right franchise. It desperately needed it, especially for a brand as iconic as Tomb Raider, as influential as it was during the PlayStation era, and how buoyed up that brand line. It buoyed up the PlayStation so much in the West and did so much to make it a success. To see it get new life after it just kind of almost rode off into oblivion, it was a great thing to see for Tomb Raider fans. So I'm going to give that my number 5.
All right. Well, I am going to kick off my list with one that honestly, I think at the time it sort of felt like it really came out of nowhere. I think the rest of my list, I won't say that they were like expected, but when they happened, they were kind of just like, oh yeah, all right, that makes sense. And this one, I think it's mostly because of just the leap in, actually, no pun intended, and you'll know why in a moment, but the leap that it took from the original to this reboot, and that is Prince of Persia: Sands of Time.
Good pick.
Yeah, it is. It's a really solid 3D platformer, action slash platformer, I guess you could call it. And this is also at a time when, to be perfectly frank, as someone who was playing almost exclusively PC games around this era, and like the, late 90s, early to mid 2000s spot, this type of game could very easily be just a shitty jank fest. And I'm not going to say that this doesn't have its moments, because it still does. But overall, to take something like Prince of Persia and turn it into a genuinely good, generally well-crafted 3-dimensional puzzle action platformer with a really neat, time reversal mechanic and everything, is an achievement. And so, I think they pulled it off extremely well. To be fair, I haven't played the other ones. I know they had the, the angry emo bangs Hot Topic one that came after. What was that, like Warrior Within or something like that?
Yeah.
So I don't know how that one turned out. I've heard some people say that it's pretty good, but I'm not sure. But at the very least, this one was a really great sort of reintroduction of a game that a lot of people at that time may not have really even ever heard of or had bothered to touch. So there you go.
Number 4.
My number 4 is I'm going to stay with some pretty generic ones here, everybody. So nothing here is going to be too surprising. And I would recommend, if you want to hear another one, go ahead and put another list of best reboots, because I'm just thinking of a bunch now that I'm talking about it. But my number 4 is going to be Mortal Kombat, which I think is 9. I don't know. The one that was released in 2011. I've only played this game briefly, but this is a series I did play and liked as a kid, as I think most people our age, in our 40s, late 30s, early 40s, have a great affinity for. And we remember how big Mortal Kombat and Mortal Kombat 2 were. And, Mortal Kombat 3 was a big game, not a good one. I know that's a hot take for a lot of people. I didn't like it. But it was a big game for a lot of people. A lot of people like Mortal Kombat 3. And then Mortal Kombat 4 came out, and yeah, it was a game, and it's over the top cheesiness. It's a 3D game. I'm not going to say it's horrible. There's much worse 3D experiences, but it's not considered to be a great one. I certainly don't remember liking it in the arcades or at home. Not to mention you had all these anthologies, like Sub-Zero anthologies, and I think they had one for Liu Kang and Kung Lao. One of them's actually pretty good, if I'm not mistaken. But then you had the one with Jack's Special Forces, and that was not good. But you had a series of games for Mortal Kombat that just didn't do anything for the brand, didn't do anything for the franchise, kind of dragged it through the mud. It was almost becoming a joke for a game that branded itself on going over the top in terms of its violence and gore as a joke, which I think was lost on a lot of people. Regardless of that, by 2011, it was kind of over for Mortal Kombat. So when this game came out, it was a big deal. It looked great. It played great. And the other thing I think that's really important about Mortal Kombat 2011, is what it kind of did for the fighting game community. This is all anecdotal, but I remember the fighting game community during the late PS2, PS3, Xbox 360 era is that it was pretty much dead. It like no one was playing fighting games anymore. The arcades had been long gone. People had been abandoning fighting games for a long time. A Street Fighter game hadn't really made a big splash in terms of popularity and damn near forever. Street Fighter 4 was close, but I don't remember it being the phenomenon that Mortal Kombat was when it came out. So this really reinvigorated the fighting game community in terms of bringing it back into a mainstream focus, or at least bringing more people into it, which is a phenomenal boon for the fighting game community, and just how rich I'm looking at it today and how much larger it is today than it was back then. I'm not sure that happens without Mortal Kombat. Uh, I'm willing to attribute it to it. I need probably do a little bit more research to see if that's the case. But what a major release, and just what a way to get the fans back in. It encapsulated everything people loved about it and just kept building and building and building up until, from understand, Mortal Kombat 1, the most recent one, isn't as well received, but everything prior to that, it really did the series a lot of good and really built that brand name back up. So yeah, my number 4 is Mortal Kombat from 2011.
All right. Well, moving right up, my number 4 is kind of I won't say a reboot of a reboot, but it's more like a second attempt at a reboot in a way, and that is Wolfenstein: The New Order. So technically, you could say, and I thought about including it here, but let's just say it's an honorable mention. Return to Castle Wolfenstein at the time, and I think that was like 2009, if I remember correctly. That one was also a big deal because we hadn't really heard jack shit from the Wolfenstein IP for ages. And then you get Return to Castle Wolfenstein, which by all accounts, pretty solid game. I remember enjoying the single player campaign. I don't think that was really the main draw, though. Most people that you'll talk to about that one will say that the multiplayer is really what sold them on it. I've never really been a huge multiplayer guy, so whatever. I was just happy that there was a new Wolfenstein game. But I really do think that the New Order was sort of an inflection point, and it was sort of this time for, id Software IPs to kind of make these grand resurrections, which may or may not be a foreshadowing. And it's just really damn good. Like, it takes what was essentially a very bare bones, 3D-ish, pseudo 3D first person shooter from way back in the day, where it was basically just like, yeah, just shoot a whole bunch of Nazis. And that's kind of it. And took it and injected a whole story into it and really modernized it. And I think all of the right ways, because I think it did a really good job of balancing what most folks would expect from something with a Wolfenstein moniker slapped on it, which is a lot of gunplay and fast action and that sort of a thing. But it also pretty intelligently wove in, a fairly sensible plot line. And I think it fleshed out a lot of things in, let's generously call it the Wolfenstein universe, I suppose. But overall, a really solid effort. And, it led to some follow-on games that some had some mixed reviews, but overall, I would call it a success. So my number 4 is Wolfenstein: The New Order.
Wolfenstein's interesting to me because I think the first-person shooter, if I recall, that's a reboot too, isn't it?
Technically, yeah. Actually, now that you mention it, yes, that you are correct. Yeah. So Wolfenstein is really just a series of reboots. That's what it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool. The Wolfenstein games I remember being a big deal too. And it was great to see that get some new blood put into it. Wait, was that up? That was not intentional.
I think it was the old blood, but yeah, still,
yeah,
I'll allow it.
No, was that the name of the game? Shit. All right.
Number 3.
Number 3 for me, I'm going to be relatively brief because I'm going to defer my time over to Shane on this because I have a feeling his is going to be much higher. And that is Doom 2016. And I'll just be kind of brief here. I think the boomer shooter, as it's called now, which I hate that name, that had mostly gone away in favor of the World War II modern warfare shooter, whatever. Like there was the World War II shooters and became the modern warfare shooter, just the Call of Duty style that dominated the industry for forever. Kind of starting with Halo. If you kind of look at the style that Halo brought in, it's not that much different than what Call of Duty does. So that's what you got. And then Doom 2016 came back, and it reminded people what made the original Doom games so much fun and what made games from that era so much fun. Fast-paced Twitch shooter games. And I've played it briefly. I am terrible at it. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But it is a different style of game, and I can understand why it needs its place in modern gaming to deviate away from all the other shooters. But I'm sure Shane's going to gush about that later, so that's all I'm going to say about it. Doom needed it too, because they got confused with Doom 3, which I don't remember being a bad game, but it's not a Doom game. So, Doom 2016, definitely up there. That's my number 3.
Oh, I can't wait till we talk about that one.
I can.
Come on, man. Monster closets and duct tape flashlights. It's a good time.
I'm sure I'll actually enjoy it, to be honest with you.
Alrighty. Let's see. Where are we at? I don't even know. Number 3. Yeah, number 3. That's where we're at. My number 3 is the only one on this list that I haven't actually played yet. But it is somewhere on my to-do list because I really actually do want to play it because it's, by all accounts, really good. I just haven't had the time. Go figure. But it is Resident Evil 7.
Ooh.
Yeah. So, man, okay. If you're familiar at all with the RE series, then you probably know that, it started out as one of the defining survival horror games ever. And once we got to about Resident Evil 5, although there are some folks that could possibly make the argument that as good as 4 is, you could sort of already see the writing on the wall as far as where the series was going, but 5 kind of just went sort of balls deep into it, and then it kind of got lost from there. But
it was 4.
Yeah. So
4.
Wait, you don't like 4?
No, I'm not saying it's bad.
Oh, okay.
I'm just saying that it started that you can make an argument it kind of started with 3, but 4 is the one where they really leaned into that.
Yeah, for sure. And what we're kind of dancing around here is the fact that it went, as many survival horror games tend to do for some fucking reason, from a more pure, slower paced survival horror experience to shooty bang bang action game time. And that's kind of where 5 and 6 went. And then there was the whole giraffe getting a blowjob. And anyway, the point is the series was not in a good spot, really. I think they had kind of lost their identity at that point, because that was also around the time, you got to figure, when, things like Gears of War and all that stuff were really popular in like the early to mid aughts. And then everyone was like, oh man, we got to make third person cover shooters. That's the hot thing. So let's shoehorn that into everything, I guess. And that's kind of where we went. And then 7 comes along years later and really just brings the series right back down to its roots. But in my opinion, just from what I've seen of it and through like social osmosis, in some of the best ways, because I think it really took this turn where it feels a lot like what it would be like to play through like an A24 horror movie. And if anybody of you are like horror fans, you probably know what I'm talking about, but it really has that kind of specific aesthetic. It feels like you're playing an indie horror flick in a lot of the best ways. And I think it was 100% the right move for the series to go in that direction. And I'm very glad that they did. And at some point, I'm going to get it to actually play it. But for right now, I will have to be satisfied with simply talking about it and putting it at my number 3.
I haven't played that yet either, which is going to be shocking here in a bit.
Number 2.
My number 2 is going to be a game that I think a lot of people don't view as a reboot, because I really think that they look at the series as just kind of how it originally was, unless the OGs know. But my number 2 is Donkey Kong Country.
Okay.
And so a lot of people, I mean, I'm sure this is almost common knowledge for retro gamers, especially if you're looking, listening to this. But Shigeru Miyamoto, I think, is more associated with Super Mario Brothers as the reason to his ascension, as the reason for his ascension to the top of video game Mount Rushmore-ism, whatever you want to call it, just dominance or legendary status. And there's good reason for that. Like, Super Mario Brothers was on the console that a lot of people got at home when they were kids, and they played it on there in like 1985 and beyond. And so when they're going back, like, yeah, Super Mario Brothers, Shigeru Miyamoto, and they say, Mario started in Donkey Kong. I need people to understand. If you do understand this, great. But I think a lot of people don't understand this. The original Donkey Kong was humongous. It was a huge game. That was what Nintendo used to build their entire Famicom NES hardware off of. They wanted to make the Famicom powerful enough that it could bring Donkey Kong home. And they still fell short quite a bit because of the size limitations. They didn't have all the levels on the cart. That's a significant release. That's why Shigeru Miyamoto really is like the king of video games today. He got started with Donkey Kong. Unfortunately, Donkey Kong had some sequels that weren't great. There was Donkey Kong Jr., which a lot of people love, which has Donkey Kong trapped in Mario trying to kill Donkey Kong Jr. Then you had Donkey Kong Jr. Math, which, sure. And then you had Donkey Kong 3, which had no Mario and was about bugs, killing bugs. Donkey Kong with bugs. And I think it's Stan, the exterminator, is the guy you're playing as. And in order to beat a level, you have to put pesticides up Donkey Kong's butt. That's a history. Now, Donkey Kong Jr. reappeared in Mario Kart briefly, and the original Super Mario Kart. But like, that series was pretty much dead. Not even on life support. Like, it was gone until Donkey Kong Country rolled around and Rare revived it. And to this day, that's the formula for every single Donkey Kong game. Even you can make the argument that Donkey Kong Country Returns is a reboot. Sure. I would completely agree with you, but at the same point, it's still using the basic fundamental formula that was established in the Donkey Kong Country series, and is still a departure from the original Donkey Kong formula, which was arcade crawling up a screen. They did such a good job of reinventing Donkey Kong that no one sees Donkey Kong as the big gorilla that came out in the first one. Rare just completely knocked this out of the park. You can make the argument that it swung the market share back in Nintendo's favor, because at that time, in the United States at least, Sega had the dominant market share. But as soon as that game came out, and it was kind of leading up to this too, because Sega was rather incompetent. But Donkey Kong just completely snatched the generation at the last final moments in order to claim dominance, at least in 2 out of 3 regions. So significant release, very, I think, very much beloved. I think the first one is actually the best one. It's the only one where you actually get to play as Donkey Kong out of the original trilogy, and just really established what people would think of as Donkey Kong moving forward. Phenomenal game, phenomenal effort, looks great, sounds great, still plays decently today, and I think is not usually referred to as a reboot because of how early it came out in all of our lives. I think that's the tough thing, because there was a lot of reboots back then, but we just didn't really necessarily think of it. I think so. That's my number 2, Donkey Kong Country. Huge impact.
Well, all right. I feel like we're gonna have a little bit of crossover on some of these. I think at least 2 of them from what I think I picked up, what you were putting down there a little bit ago. But
Yep.
my number 2, I think, is gonna be divisive, because I know I know the sentiment around this is very divisive. There are some folks who are like, no, ever since that point, the series has sucked balls. And then there are other folks that are like, ever since that point, this series was actually fucking playable. So, I mean, it depends on what side of the fence you fall on. I tend to be a little bit on the latter. I wouldn't be as harsh to say as they're unplayable, but they're certainly somewhat inscrutable and very dense. But my number 2 is Fallout 3.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I mean, well, I certainly think I'm right, but there are a lot of, older diehards who, came up with the OG Fallout 1 and 2 that will definitely die on this hill, that when Fallout 3 happened, the series died to them because it wasn't what they wanted. It wasn't what Fallout used to be. It was an isometric, turn-based, very deep, very complex RPG. And that's great. I don't want to disparage that at all. But I have tried, and this is coming from someone who has played a fair number of Western RPGs in their day. I have tried to play both of those games on several occasions, and I cannot get more than a few hours into it because they're just so fucking obtuse. Like, there's just I just don't feel like I have the time to try to like decrypt what the game wants. And I'm sure that is definitely a selling point for some people, but it just never managed to hook me. Whereas Fallout 3, holy shit. That game, I sunk deep into Fallout 3. I spent hundreds of hours wandering the wasteland and, role playing out my wasteland survivor fantasy, and, hoarding every single thing that wasn't nailed down, as you do in those kind of games. And man, it's so good to me. And again, some people are going to hate me for this, but in my opinion, I think the Fallout series really actually hit its stride with 3. So take that for how you will, but there's a reason it's at my number 2.
I just gonna expound on that a little bit because it's not on my list. Fallout 3 is not, but I fall in the camp where I do prefer the original 2.
Mm-hmm.
However, I could not recommend them to anybody nowadays if they haven't gotten into them in the past.
Yeah.
You're like, everything you say is correct. They are just overly complicated, very, very non-linear in its approach, doesn't hold your hand in the slightest. Very difficult, and it's an acquired taste, impossible for me to recommend. But the more modern ones seem far more accessible. to more modern sensibilities. So I can't argue your point. I think you're 100% spot on and right here.
Number 1.
My number 1 was already brought up, so I'm going to expound upon it just slightly more. My number 1 is Resident Evil 7. So why is Resident Evil 7 my number 1 here? For a lot of the reasons Shane already said. Resident Evil was a series that was doing phenomenally for Capcom in terms of sales. I think Resident Evil 6, when it came out, was the best-selling Resident Evil game in the series. But it was received poorly. I think that Capcom also saw the writing on the wall at the time that their general philosophy when it came to making games needed to be reassessed. So aside from Monster Hunter, what did Capcom really have? Nothing really. They they came out with like Mega Man, was it 9 and 10? They came out with Mega Man 9 and 10 to like the joy of all probably 100,000 people that bought it, but that's not going to keep the lights on over there. Probably more than that for Mega Man 9 and 10. I mean, I hope so. Those are good games. But the thing that Resident Evil 7 really did, in addition to Monster Hunter, so I don't want to put it all in Resident Evil 7, is I think and this is why it's my number 1, it reinvigorated Capcom. And I think in doing so, you actually see a lot of new life being injected into Japanese developers and Eastern developers once again. Because for a long time, man, it was rough. Like, Japanese development was rough. Western development took over the gaming industry for a long time, starting with the Xbox 360, I would argue. Aside from Nintendo, of course, but the Wii U is there, as much as I love it, it's just not successful. A lot of people didn't enjoy what was being put out by Nintendo at that time. I mean, Nintendo people did. I'm an example of that, but it just wasn't at the levels of success that people wanted. And so I think I don't know if the Switch came out before Resident Evil 7 or not, but it's right there. So Nintendo aside, because Nintendo is Nintendo and Nintendo will do what Nintendo does, and that's always find a way to make massive hits. Japanese development was a far cry from where it was in the 90s and early 2000s. And I really think that Resident Evil 7 sparked that because Capcom really led the charge. If you look at Eastern development right now, it's starting to fire off. Maybe not in terms of sales, but like the quality has just skyrocketed. Western development right now in terms of recording this in 2025 is almost going through a crash. It's overly bloated, tons of layoffs. The focus is in the wrong place in terms of, I think, where major gaming development is going and is causing a serious problem in terms of what's going to happen to Western development studios and developers. And I don't think you're seeing that with Eastern development companies right now, unless they bought into the Western development philosophy, kind of like what Squaresoft is currently going through. And it probably could be a lot worse or not Squaresoft, Square Enix. But I think that's one of the biggest reasons. This is why it's my number 1, is kind of forming the mentality behind modern Eastern development success, which is what's hot currently. Now, this answer could change in a few years. The industry does change as trends do change. Not everything's a horror game, but I think the footprint that it left modernly and currently is just too hard to ignore, especially when you have a company like Capcom really returning to form overall. And I'm not seeing any major department where they're missing. They're honoring their retro legacy. They are continuing to make new games, perhaps dipping into the Monster Hunter and Resident Evil well too much. But hey, if you're taking that money from those games that are being successful and you're putting it into smaller projects that your fan base can appreciate, I'm not going to cry too much, because there's plenty of other content coming out from them. So that's the reason Resident Evil 7 is my number 1. I think it had a long-lasting impact well beyond Resident Evil as a series in and of itself. I think there's a big underswell that has moved forward many other areas of gaming today.
All right, here it is. The most unsurprising number one since the last most unsurprising number one. Best reboot on Shane's list. What could it possibly be? I don't know.
Duke Nukem 3D.
Yes, hell yeah. No, Duke Nukem forever, motherfuckers. Let's go. No, it's obviously Doom 2016. Holy shit. What a fucking revelation, man. Like, as someone who is a giant Doom fan, having this come out and not suck absolute ass was one of the best things to happen ever. It's so fucking good. And the thing is, it leans into every single thing that makes Doom Doom. And it does it in all of the most satisfying ways. They took a look at Doom and they're like, okay, you know what? Doom 3 is what it is. I will maintain, and I will expound upon this at a later date when we inevitably talk about it, but I maintain that it is a good game. It is not, if it had been called anything other than Doom, we wouldn't even be having this conversation, I think. But such as it is, they decided to try something different, and it maybe didn't work as well. But we had nothing really since then, as far as Doom was concerned. And by all accounts, most of us just assumed that the IP was just dead. Like, they weren't really going to ever do anything new with it. And Doom 3 kind of killed it in a way. And then Doom 2016 comes out, and oh my God, they're like, you know what? What's cool about Doom? It's super fast paced. It is just drenched in gore. It is in your face. It has a unabashedly metal inspired soundtrack, and it is a power fantasy through and through. And they took all of that and just cranked it up, and turned out to be one of the best, in my opinion, one of the best FPS games, I think, ever. And one of the best video game soundtracks probably ever. Mick Gordon is a fucking genius. And there you go. That, I don't know what else to say. It is a beautiful thing. It is everything I wanted out of a new Doom game. And I was and am wholly satisfied with it.
Unsurprising, but very well said.
Thank you.
I have that. I mentioned it before. I played a little bit of it. I think you gifted it to me at one point too.
Probably.
I need to actually go all the way through it. Thank goodness next year makes it becomes 10.
Oh my God, it does. Ooh boy.
You ready to talk about it on our podcast?
No, man. We gotta talk about Doom 3 first. We can't just skip over that.
We can do Doom month. How about that?
Hell yeah. I'm on board. Maybe we'll replace Spooptober month with just Doom month.
I'm down. All right, man. I guess that concludes our list for top 5 reboots, our best reboots, as recommended by Ozzy. Ozzy recommended this, and our patrons voted for this. So thank you, Ozzy, for the topic. Thank you, patrons, for voting for the best reboot category. And if you want to nominate and vote on categories, just head on over to our Patreon, which is in our link tree, which Shane is about to talk about now.
Oh, shit, I am? Okay. Well, we sure do have a place where you can go to find all of the stuff that has to do with Retro Hangover, and that just happens to be our link tree, which is linktr.ee/Retro Hangover. So just pop on over there, and you can find all the goodies, like our public Discord, or our socials, or perhaps our Twitch or YouTube channels, or the Patreon, where you can join for as little as $1 and get access to a whole butt ton of extra content. As if the main feed was not enough, there's just more just waiting for you, just lurking like a monster in a closet, for example. And and of course the merch store's got cool shit that you can buy and put on your body, and technically that's almost anything that's there, because you could wear a shirt or you could put a sticker on your forehead. I'm not going to judge you. You can do what you want with it. It's your life. So there you go.
Put them on your nipples.
Yes. Make pasties out of them. Actually, that's not a bad idea. Anyway, there you have it. So, Chris, anything else you want to throw in here before we wrap things up?
Hey, listen, if we get 10 more $10 patrons, I will wear RHP stickers over my nipples for a stream. And that's all I'll wear. Well, except for pants. I will wear pants because I tend to stand up. So can't have that going. That's happened on Twitch before. But if you want that to happen, just head on over to, well, first our Patreon. But if you want to watch that happen, if it ever happens, probably not, you can head over to Twitch or YouTube and see us on 9 p.m. Eastern time on Sundays when we'll play games of some sort to entertain all of you. That's, once again, that's 9 p.m. Eastern time on Sundays on Twitch or YouTube. I would say and recommend Twitch, preferably. We don't have ads over there. Don't worry about ads. We're too lazy to implement it. We don't want to be encumbered by two-factor authentication. If you like two-factor authentication, you might be a Nazi. I'm just saying. And we'll have to shoot you in Wolfenstein. I'll justify it. Just call it
that took a quick turn. All right. If you like cybersecurity, you are probably a fascist. There you go. Okay. You heard it here first. Yes.
Everyone is fascist.
Okay. Well, on that definitely not cancelable note, until next flight,
play with your totally not fascist joysticks.